And welcome on into another edition of the Limitless Leadership Lounge in a new year now, as we're excited to be joining you from 2022. I'm John Gehring, as always, your host, joined by Coach Jim Johnson and Dr. Rehnuma. And this special episode, we brought along another guest, and in fact, he is a connection with Coach Jim Johnson. So, Coach, can you introduce our guest today before we get rolling?
Yeah, I'm really excited. This is a gentleman that actually, his name is btreasurer. He's a leadership consultant that actually he calls himself the Chief Encouragement Officer, and his company is called Giant Leap Consulting. And as you know, our listeners know, and certainly Rehnuma and John know, I'm a very avid reader. In a book I read a few years ago, it was called Leaders Open Doors. And I really enjoyed the book. And the author, I did not know. His name was btreasurer. And so I delved into Bill a little bit, and I reached out to him and we connected, and we've actually become pretty good friends. I've actually been fortunate enough. Bill does a lot of consulting in various companies around the country, and I've had the honor to speak at some of the businesses that he consults at. So it's been a real honor to get to know Bill, and he's a really special guy. And I know he's going to give us a lot of wisdom as we focus on trying to help young and emerging leaders. Bill we're excited also to share that coming out this year, he has a new book called Leadership 2 Words at a Time. And we're going to certainly ask some questions about that. And so we're going to get going. And first of all, Bill, we'd like to welcome you. Thanks so much for being a guest on our podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me, John. It's great to meet you. And Rehnuma, it's great to see you as well. And Coach Johnson, always a pleasure to have the opportunity to spend time with you, work with you. You always come in and delight my customers and such, and you've got such a great story. And I can't think of another person who lives their mission as well as you do to help people's dreams come true, because you really actually do that. I've seen you do it with my clients. So it's great to be here today. I'm looking forward to our time together.
Well, thanks, Bill. I appreciate the kind words, and looking forward to getting through this COVID here so we can meet again here soon. So we're going to delve in. Actually, I'm going to start with a question that has something to do with your book. And the fact it says, how did you come to explain leadership with a simple approach of 2 words?
It's a good question. There's two ways that the book's title was informed. The first is when I wrote Leaders Open Doors, it was very important for me to simplify the message, because as you know, that book was inspired by a conversation with my then 5-year-old son. He's now 15, but he had come home from school and he had gotten to be the class leader. And I had no intention of writing a new book. I had already written a couple of books, and as you know, it's kind of hard to write a book. So he comes home though from school, and my wife said, "Hey, honey, our son got to be the class leader today." And being that I teach leadership, I was like, "Hey, that's great. Come here. Hey, Ian, what'd you get to do as class leader?" And he looked at me and said, "I got to open doors for people." Wow. And I thought, wow, that's really what leadership is about, is creating opportunities for others. And I toyed with that notion, and before long I started writing that book. And I wanted to keep the spirit of the innocence and purity of my 5-year-old son and that inspiration in that book, because I think a lot of leadership authors can complexify and over nuance the idea of leadership, and we put our steps together in our quadrant models and after a while we are really trying to showcase our intellect instead of saying something that really is important about leadership. So I at that moment in time, when I was writing that book, I started putting together some 2-word concepts about leadership. Meanwhile, when I would do executive coaching, when a coachee, and I do a lot of executive coaching, when a coachee is confused and they're all muddled up about what a situation and they don't know how to go forward in their path, if I ask them to laser in as few words as possible as to what the issue is and what the action that will resolve the issue is, when they really condense it, it's the shorter the amount of words, the clearer they become, and the more likely they are to actually do something about the issue. So I'll give you one example. I had a very intense sort of senior manager who wanted to become a more senior executive, but he was overly intense. And he would go to meetings with his bosses, and then I'd get feedback about, you know, you need to help this guy calm down. You can tell he wants to be where we are, but he's overly ambitious. And so I asked this coachee, laser in for me on, if you were being the leader you need to be in that upper level room, what is that leader? And he just pulled out of his hat very quickly, I need to have calm confidence. I said, then those are your words. Those are your 2 words, calm confidence. And they became our goal. And then he'd go to those meetings and he'd send me a text message. I'm going to the meeting, CC, and that meant calm confidence. So I started cataloging a bunch of 2-word phrases and ideas that I think are essential to leadership. And that's the inspiration. Leaders Open Doors and my coachees.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Beautiful. And this is such a powerful message, like, and with a simple 2 words, you explain the essence of leadership. And while this is the emerging and new era with so many uncertainty we are experiencing. But as a new leader, one of the questions I have to ask you, because you have been an expert in this field for more than 30 plus years, I have seen there is this saying that we need to lead our lives, not accept it. But often we tend to like go along with accepting things as they are. But as a leader, we have to make those difficult choices. So for example, when I started my nonprofit, funding is a major issue. And in our country, many people said that, oh, you have to bribe these people to get the fund. And if you want to run the program, you have to do those things. So for me, it's no. Like I am trying to teach our young people moral character building. So there are like organizations like tobacco and other things. And I said that I will never go and get fund from those organizations that has conflict with my values and values. But often I'm told, like many younger people will tell us, like, it's about running your program. If you can run your program, you're going to do good for more people. So why don't you compromise? But till now, I have not yet compromised. So what is those choices? Like, how do we make those decisions? Like, should we priority growth, revenue, or should we stuck with some beliefs and core values that define us?
Oh, look at the time. I'm not sure that I'm... No, I tell you, it's a juicy question, and it so relates to leadership, and it so relates to the tension and how leadership. First of all, let's acknowledge that leadership is hard. It's not easy. It can be easy to understand, and that's the proposal of my book, is that if we boil it down, the essentials of it are easy to understand.
Right.
To put into practice, they're very hard. And this becomes the dilemma. And sometimes the dilemma is, hey, I can make more revenue if I compromise my character. I can make more revenue if I compromise my value system. And we all like to think that we've got strong character, but then we look at that extra money we can make, and we're like, well, I compromise it just a little bit. So this is a very central and difficult question. I can think of it through a number of prisms. I can remember an organization that I worked at where if you were a senior partner and you were bringing in a lot of revenue to the company, it afforded you behavioral latitude. So people would cut you some slack on the fact that a lot of people were quitting behind you. They weren't staying with the company. They were saying how mistreated they were. But other people would forgive you for that because of the revenue you were bringing in for the company. You would get a pass until the company ended up deciding on 5 different measures of success, revenue being one, but treatment of people became one of the 5, right? 20% of your judgment at the end of the year, whether you did a good job or not, was now going to be based on your treatment of people. And they had to back that up with teeth. That meant that some people who formerly mistreated people had to be fired if they didn't make that change. So it's living a value system that becomes very important. Now let me say, Rehnuma, just as a matter of balance, that I think it's good to be an idealist. And when we come out of graduate school, for example, if we're lucky enough to and can afford to go to graduate school, or somehow it becomes the way that we're able to do that, we can come out of graduate school with a sense of idealism. And that's good. It's fresh and has vibrancy, and we want to carry that into our jobs. But when we go into the workforce, we meet the reality of the workforce. And what I would say is important is to have practical idealism. Don't have impractical idealism. So I'll give you an example from my own life. I was the chairman of the board of Leadership Asheville. It's a community-based leadership program. And I was in a volunteer role. 2 years before I moved into that role, it was decided to move Leadership Asheville away from the University of North Carolina at Asheville as our major funding source. We wanted to go out on our own and try to drum up membership and pay for it fully from membership and sponsorship outside of the university, because we felt that the university had too much decision influence. So it had been steered away from that funding source. Well, in those 2 years, what happened was we went into a recession, and now we had no funding source, and we weren't going to be able to put the program on.
Right.
So I was chairman of the board, and I had other board members, and it's a lot of grappling decisions, a lot of talk, and the decision was made to steer the organization back to UNC Asheville. There was a lot of consternation about that. A lot of people were telling me and the board that we were sellouts, that we were weak, that we would be back to the same position that we were in before. But the practical idealism was, but we had no funding source. The most logical thing to do was see if we could rebuild and reconnect and reestablish a relationship with the University of Asheville, University of North Carolina at Asheville. And so we did. And that was about 7 years ago. The program is still attached to the University of Asheville at North Carolina. They figured out through hard conversations how much decision influence the university would have. And it's going swimmingly. But we did have to compromise. We had to face the reality of our ideals, but measure it against the practicality of, do we want the organization to sustain itself and in fact be viable? So it is you have to make hard choices as a leader, and you want idealism matched and balanced with practicality.
Yeah, and setting standards, because when I'm teaching about morality and character building to my young people, at the same time, if I take fund from a tobacco organization, that is the total, although they're ready to give a lot of money for these kind of youth programs, but when the mission does not goes with your values and everything. So that's why I say that let's wait and see. Like, if we are doing the right thing, people will understand our type of leadership, and they can get on board.
You've really tapped into something so important, and this idea of what is the compromise, how much of a compromise. A very tangible example related to what you talked about is a lot of schools, a lot of public high schools will get money from companies that promote and sell sugar water with effervescence. Now, you know the companies, right? We all know the big companies that sell sugar water and different other vending machines. But that affords them to build a basketball court because they get the sponsorship of these, big sugar promoting companies. What I would say is, if you're the leader, you're the principal of the school, and you're saying, look, we want a basketball court because that's good for our students to have a recreational facility and such, then balance it and say, okay, yes, you can put in your sugar water vending machine, and we also want a healthy food choice vending machine at the same time. So at least you're bringing balance to the equation.
We're talking with Bill Treasurer here, an author and lifelong student of leadership on the Limitless Leadership Lounge. Bill, I thought you touched on a really good point earlier, and I wanted to go back to it. The gap between idealism and the reality sometimes. Do you feel, being a student of leadership over the course of the years? I mean, I was 1 year old at the turn of the century, so I kind of missed out on that era. And then now, the 2010s and now even the 2020s, which is scary. Do you feel that over the course of those couple of decades, that gap between your idealist, concept and what the reality is has grown because of things like sponsorships, because of things that present up more opportunities to profit for companies or organizations? Or do you feel that that is still, there's always been that big gap between the idealism and the reality?
Well, I think there's always been sellouts, right?
Yeah.
There's always been people who are willing to sell their soul to make a very compromised choice, and we've seen it in our lifetime. We've seen people who had an otherwise stellar reputation do something that jeopardized their entire reputation and decimated it through some very, very compromised choice, or worse, unethical behavior, right? So we've seen it in our lifetimes. What I will say is that I'm excited by a new generation of people, a younger generation of people that want more than making money. They want to do good and do well at the same time. They want an organization that, yes, makes revenue, because, you know, no money, no mission. You got to have the money to be able to further the mission. But we also want to make sure that that mission includes giving back to our communities and doing well and doing good in our communities at the same time. So I'm excited that, on the one hand, the temptation may have grown to create that wedge and that gap about the compromised choices that can be made. There's more choices of compromise that are available to us. But I'm watching a new generation of people who aren't willing to make those compromised choices. I think that this idea of the great resignation that we have going on right now, a lot of people, you know, initially during COVID and the pandemic, we all freaked out. We're like, I got to go back to work. I'm going to have to work from home. What am I going to do, right? And then after a while, we're like, I got to work from home. And then it was like, hey, I get to actually eat dinner with my kids tonight. Hey, I get to sleep on my own bed tonight. Hey, I kind of like working from home. Hey, I don't know if I want to go back on the crazy train. Right. So I think that now people are starting to rethink, what does it mean to be a human being in the workforce? How much of my life am I willing to give up to an organization that I work for? And the organizations are rethinking, what are we going to require of people? What are we going to extract from them in their service to our organization? And are we willing to make compromises towards letting them work from home, for example? And if they don't, more people are going to sort of make this resignation choice. So those are my long-winded answers to your question, John.
Great. Hey, Bill, you mentioned mission, and you know, something we talk a lot about on this podcast, and we share in trying to help young leaders, is getting your own personal mission, and then also having a mission for your team or organization or business. So my question to you is, how important, and do you have your own personal mission statement? How important do you think that is to help you lead yourself? And then the second part to that is, how important do you think it is to have clarity and a mission for a group, whether it be a team, a business, whatever it happens to be?
It is very important. And part of the reason it's important is what happens before the mission, before you define what the mission is. It's the excavation, it's the contemplation. It's answering the question, what am I all about? What do I want to be all about in this world? What do I stand for in this world? What do I stand against in this world? When I die, how do I want to have etched my initials on the tree of humanity? What is the legacy that I would have liked to have left? I literally just read an article about this last night on Jimmy Fallon, of all people. Oh, wow. And he was coming to the conclusion of, I got to figure out my why. Why do I want to do this? Why am I in this entertainment business? And it became a very simple equation through a lot of contemplation. And that is that his personal mission is to make people happy, that he wants them to go to bed with a smile on their face as they doze off, right? It's a simple, sort of mission, but at least he knows what it is. Yeah. In my own case, and I knowing that how mission is important to you, Jim, and that you live your mission. I talked about it in the beginning of the day. I pulled up mine, and I refresh it. I take a look at it, every 6 months or so, or when I'm getting ready to do a leadership class, I know that mission is going to be involved. And my mission is to make a lasting impact on the world by using my creative talents to their fullest expression in order to help, heal, and strengthen others. In other words, use what I've got to help people do better in this world. And I've got sub things underneath it, my personal philosophy underneath it. You know, one of them is I believe in leaving people better off than I found them. That's like one of my philosophies. I've got 7 philosophies attached to it. So I think it's important because what it does is it keeps you in check. It holds you accountable to yourself. And so that you know when you're being off-centered, and you know when you're not living your mission. Your own conscience starts to bug you, as it should. It's why you have a conscience. So I think that a mission is important for a human being. Your second question, it becomes important for a team and an organization as well, really for the same reasons, that it holds it accountable, that other people can know what this organization stands for or what this team stands for. And then when it's out of alignment with itself, people can call them on it. Because it's not enough to have the mission. You know, Enron had a mission. You know, they had a mission statement in their, you know, hallways. But the real thing is, do you live it? And living it is hard for the reasons Rehnuma talked about earlier. Is, you know, how well is there too much of a gap between because there's an idealism that comes with having a mission, right? And we live it to the best we can. On my best days, I'm really close to that mission. On the days when I'm really grumpy and resentful and petty and judgment, I'm off mission, right? So we do the best we can do.
Yeah. And I hear you. And that's why, like, all our function also follows through the mission. Who are we going to hire? Which people are going to be in the team or not? Which company we are going to partner with? I think mission directs everything when you're leading an organization.
A really great point. A friend of mine, Chad Littlefield, he's an expert in the area of relationship building. He's got a TED Talk and such. But he has a phrase that he recently introduced me to, is let your purpose be your bouncer. Right? Like when you're deciding who gets in the bar, and you know, and what you allow into your organization, and who gets promoted in your organization, and what your the pursuit of your organization is, right? Like your mission, your person needs to be your bouncer.
And while we were talking about mission, I was wondering, like, Simon Sinek was talking about safe place, creating work as a safe place where your like subordinates or employees or who is working for you, they feel safe to make mistakes. So how do we make, as a leaders, how do we make our working place a safe place, and they feel that they're not always judged for every single thing that they're doing? Because it can create some problem and tension to become optimized. So what are your, like, observation and suggestion? And I think trust also plays a huge role here. So what are your takes in this?
You know, the person who's done a lot of writing on this is Amy Edmondson. She wrote The Fearless Organization. She wrote another book on teaming. I wrote a book on courage in 2008, and I have a whole chapter to creating safety. I didn't call it psychological safety, but it is what it is. And the idea being that how you carry yourself, your personhood as a leader, how you carry yourself. Are you a short fuse? Do you immediately jump to anger when something goes wrong? Are you really adhesed to your idea of being an authority figure? And when somebody questions a decision you make, do you take it as an affront to your authority or not? Or do you do it differently? So it starts with your personhood, how you carry yourself. Are you willing to share your vulnerabilities? Do you share mistakes that you've made, pitfalls you've fallen into, so that other people recognize the normalcy and the necessariness of doing that? I think of a person that I've been fortunate to have worked with a couple of times. Her name is Sarah Blakely. She's the founder of Spanx. And she says that when she was a little kid, her dad used to sit her and her brother down at the dinner table and ask them a simple question at the end of every week. He'd say, all right, kids, what have you failed at this week? What have you failed at this week? She said she learned an important lesson as a little kid, that if you're not extending yourself, even to the point of failure, then you're not really going to be successful and you're not going to thrive in this world. She said she carries that ethos into Spanx today. And when somebody makes a forward falling, non-habitual mistake with, you know, sound logic in the service of the organization, she's never disappointed. She goes up and gives them a big high five, like her father gave her when she would have failure. So your own personhood sends a message of safety or not. You know, organizations, especially manufacturing environments, some of my clients are construction companies. They spend a huge amount of money and emphasis on creating a safe work environment. But it's not enough to have physical safety. You've got to make sure that there is psychological safety. And as we talked about, so, you know, your own personhood is going to be part of that creates that psychologically safe environment.
Very true.
Hey, Bill, I got to piggyback because you mentioned the word and you hear it a lot. And I think there's a lot of power to it, vulnerability. So again, to help young leaders, my question to you is, tell us about a mistake or two you made when you early in your journey in leadership, and how did you correct them?
Oh man, I'm embarrassed to share. You know, so it stings to go back, but I know it can be helpful.
This is vulnerability.
Exactly. Yeah, I know, right? It's actually one of the dimensions of courage that I talk about, is the willingness to sort of disclose and get exposed. So I can think of it a time in my own life, Jim. I was working with a client that I had never worked with before. It was also the major competitor of my best client. So my best client, I was now going to be doing some engagements with their biggest competitor, which I felt a little, uneasy about. And I was doing some work, and I was doing good work. And in one of the sessions, the CEO of the company just did a little humorous jab at me. And it had something to do with wearing a Speedo. Because as you know, I used to be a professional high diver that would dive from 100-foot platforms into little pools as a member of the US high diving team. And I take jabs about the Speedo, here and there. Here he was, the CEO, jabbing me about a Speedo. And instinctively, like I felt the need to jab him back in a collegial, humorous way, but I over jabbed and I said something offensive to him. And you could see him, it startled him, and it was an affront to his authority. And the 12 apostles he had in the room, his own senior leadership team, were all, dumbfounded. And I just had this face on my, did I overstep my bounds? And then at the break, he took me aside, grabbed my arm. He's like, what was that all about? That was so inappropriate and blah, blah, blah. And he was right? And man, I felt super embarrassed. And the next week, I flew back to Chicago on my own dime just to have lunch with him and to apologize to his face, to ask for forgiveness. But I also talked to my mentor. And it was a boss whom I had worked for at Accenture. He remains a dear mentor to me today. He's the best leader I've ever worked for. And I processed this with him. And my mentor didn't try to allay my hurt feelings. Like, he didn't say, oh, it's okay, Bill, he overreacted. He didn't say that. He said, you know what, Bill? I've seen you do that. He said, I think sometimes you're a little quick to get informal. You're a little quick to get into the humor. You overstep the bounds of humor. And I think this is a good lesson for you about diplomacy, about waiting a beat before you say the thing, about being more thoughtful than reactive, about not getting so offended when somebody says something to you and wanting to jab them back. It turned into a great lesson for me. I heard that Gandhi said the truth only hurts if it should. And sometimes the truth stings because it's stinging you into better behavior. And so that's an example of a regretful situation that I think ultimately made me a better professional on the backside.
Yeah, I love how you took that and it wasn't something that you got defensive about, and you actually admitted that was overstepping your bounds. I think a lot of us, especially the younger generation, unfortunately, and sometimes we take offense to things very quickly. I don't know if you've seen, Bill, over the course of the last couple of decades in your study of leadership, if you've seen a big change in how offendable people are in general. And I mean, I don't know, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like the digital age of social media kind of numbs us a little bit, and makes it okay to be offended all the time at every little thing. And what kind of, if that is true, what kind of impact does that have on a leader, and how should we react to this changing trend?
Yeah, wow, you guys are good with the hard questions. Man, these are
That's why we
not
bring on leaders like you.
yeah, these are not sunshine and lollipop questions. The it is. I think we'd all do better, right, to spend a little less time on social media, and certainly less time arguing on social media, right? It's time to get back to sending people memes and videos of cats and stuff. I think that part of the challenge of today is that so many things have become politicized, and we don't have a common grounding on what truth is anymore, and our sources of truth are wildly disparate. It's balkanized. It used to be, when I was growing up, there were 3 television stations, and you had the CBS, ABC, and NBC News for a half an hour, and they were sharing a common news, narrative and theme. But that's been balkanized. It's now, so, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of sources to get news, ranging from a person, running something out of their own home, to a major, news source, when it's really angertainment, where we are we are trying to get our forms of education through a mechanism designed to make us angry at one another, because that's how it draws more sponsorship. So I think that if you want to be an educated adult, you have to be thoughtful about what you put into your head and where you're going to get your news sources from. And I would hope that you would be educated enough to grab multiple sources so you can sort out what is truth to you versus I remember Stephen Colbert coming up with the word truthy, right? Like truth should, be like, well, it's a little bit malleable. I do think too, John, that, but there's also been a positive evolution. When Coach Johnson and I were coming up, there was the idea of command and control leadership. And I think the new generation coming up, we can give them grief about being the trophy generation and getting their feelings hurt and stuff. And there's probably some stereotypes have a thin line of truth somewhere in there. But what I think that the new generation won't stand for is for abusive one-way leadership that is solely directive, solely about the command, and doesn't take into consideration the good treatment of the people who get the work done on the behalf of the leader. So I think it's passé. Command and control leadership, it may be appropriate in very limited instances, but we won't, the new generation coming up won't stand for it. They'll leave. They'll go to a place where there's not command and control leadership. So it means that leaders, and in old school industries such as those that I work with, like construction, they have to deal with that. They have to now find a new way of leading that allows for vulnerability, that allows for emotional intelligence, that isn't just my way or the highway, that allows the more inclusive voices, that seeks diversity, right, and promotes inclusion. These are differences for old school industries that are now having to make a shift into that. And I think it's a positive shift. So sure, there's some negative stuff that we are experiencing through social media. There's no doubt about it. But there's also positive evolutions going on that we want to, promote.
Well, that makes me feel a little better. See,
Yeah.
Coach, we're not all bad.
No, and I think this new generation also, they know what they want. And those indecisiveness also, there are indecisiveness, but also they want to make this world also better. So I see a lot of younger generation into environment, climate, work-life balance. So I think the new leader should also consider those things, those elements into the organization. So you
I
cannot
totally,
work till 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock. More you work, more better you are.
yeah, right. I think that that's so true. And I love to see some of the things that the new generation is involved in advancing and to create a better world. That said, there's always a certain population of people, and it does tend to be the newer people coming into a workforce that get a little bit infatuated with the idea of I'm going to work from the beach in Bali, and I'm only going to work 4 hours a week, and I'm gonna make $1 million by inventing an app that's gonna, it's there is some infatuation of working for unicorn organizations that are like oases they're like mirages actually, the closer you get to them, the more they disappear. And I did grow up through the dot-com era of when the dot-coms exploded in the early 2000s. There was a lot of investor money going on to organizations that were merely really PowerPoints. They were concepts, but they weren't tangible concepts. And so I think we have to absolutely create a better world. Let's do stuff that makes for clean air and clean water for everybody. Let's do it, right? And promote that. And let's also be careful about what we get infatuated with that we think is going to be easy for us to work, that make our work life, still success still takes elbow grease. Like I do believe in some of the old things, like you may not have to work until midnight every night, right? But you still got to do work, right? To make things happen in your life.
Yes, crypto trading may not be sustainable. And maybe that's another topic for another time, but it's true. Our younger generation is so infatuated with those types of things. Ooh, chase that really, shiny looking object there. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Rehnuma, you had a question?
Yeah, but one question I would like to ask Bill is about, he talked about fake leaders. And often we are in this world, like not everybody could be a leader. We have to understand that. And if you want to send message to younger generation, like how do you know that you are ready to be a leader? And how do you identify the fake leaders? What are some characteristics of fake leaders?
I think the real leaders that do this upfront excavation. Who am I? What are my gifts? What are the shadows that those gifts cast if I overuse those gifts?
Right.
Where are some areas that I know I'm never going to be strong? What is my relationship with others? What do I think of others? Are they objects to me? Are they impediments to me? Or do I actually enjoy the spirit of working with other people? But this deep self-exploration, because once you do that, now you have a certain degree of authenticity. You know who you are, and you can live in your own skin, comfortable who you are. This is a strange example, but I saw a recent video, a small video with, actually, I think it was a TikTok. It was Barbara Walters, who was a interviewer of Jim Johnson in our age, and she was interviewing Dolly Parton. And I think Dolly Parton is an American heritage. And let's not, and please don't underestimate Dolly Parton as business savvy, right? She owns Dollywood. She created a nonprofit that helps underprivileged kids read. She's written numerous books. She wrote gigantic song sellers, right? So I consider her a savvy businesswoman. And Barbara Walters asked her, don't you think that some people think you're a joke? That's what she said to her. And Dolly Parton didn't get offended or anything. She said, I know who I am. She knows, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm very comfortable with the human being that I am. And I know what I'm here to do in this world. I think that when you're comfortable in your own skin, when you've done a deep evaluation of who you are, what the values are that you stand for, you're not a fake, you're authentic. And nobody can take you off your game by calling you a fake or calling you a, what did I say that Barbara said, that don't people think, whatever the word she was, I forget what I said. And so now, having said that, I think that there are people that are in leadership for the wrong reasons, or they may start out with a pure reason, but as they get into leadership, people start treating them differently. It becomes very seductive. When you're moved into a leadership role, you get more perks. You get a bigger salary. At some point, you'll get a bigger office. Steve Jobs used to take 2 spaces at Apple with his BMW and they were the handicap spaces. He would park sideways in the handicap spaces.
Jeez.
So people start treating you differently, special, and then you start taking advantage of that special treatment. Now you're violating the number one rule of leadership, and that is leadership is not about the leader.
Right.
It's not about you. Leadership is about the people that you are privileged to lead. So even if you start out with pure motives, you got to keep yourself in check so that when people start treating you special, you don't start enjoying and wanting and now demanding that special treatment from others.
Yeah, and I think that's where you tie it with humility. You have to be humble. And I have seen that those are the real leaders in our country and also abroad who are humble, higher level of integrity, and they have a sense of responsibility to others. They're the one who sustains for a long term. But the fake leaders, they rise and they fall. They don't, people do not remember them.
Yeah, it's,
I'm
sorry, go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to say, and I think security is so important too. Security in yourself, because not to bring back a bad memory, Bill, but that Speedo incident, right? When you were, when you jabbed back a little too hard, being the most secure version of yourself, you may kind of laugh that off, and you may actually kind of make fun of yourself at the same time, and then the whole situation that followed that wouldn't have happened. Obviously, hindsight is always 20/20, but I think that's something that we lack a lot of times in our culture, is the ability to make fun of ourselves instead of that defensive, like, no, okay, now I'm gonna, here's a comeback to get you. I think that's really important too.
Yeah, I think so. The idea of humility becomes very, very important. And I'll give you a strange example, because I don't know that everybody would think of this person as humble, although I kind of do a little bit. But Bono from the band U2. I went to a U2 show one time, and they during the middle of the show, they stopped the song and pointed to this kid who had a big poster saying, please bring me on stage. And they did. They brought this guy on stage, and he played a song with the band, and the audience went wild. And as they put the guy back into the audience, Bono looked at the kid in the audience and looked at the audience and said, you know what? A rock star like me needs to always remember that that's where I came from, that I'm that kid. And I think a leader needs to remember that they came from the followers. That however special they start, that whatever wealth they might start to accumulate, however big their house gets, they got to always remember the humble roots that I hope that they were fortunate to be able to have started with. The other thing, John, too, is that every single leader, every morning, you got to be able to do, Jim Johnson and I know it as the mirror check. You got to be able to look yourself in the mirror and be comfortable in your own skin. If you're averting your eyes because you're a fake, or that you're living out of step with your value system, then you got to do whatever actions you need to get back in step with your values. The mirror check, your self-conscience is very important to leadership.
Bill, I've been fortunate to speak to some of your businesses that you consult with. And as much as I'm excited about the younger generation and I want to help them with the leadership, I do want to share that one of the businesses that you consult with that I was able to speak to, that I was so impressed that there are two leaders that were older than both of us, were in the room both of the times that I spoke. And I know talking to you that they were there because they're constant learners, and they want to learn about, because a lot of the people were quite a bit younger because of the training that you were doing and I was helping with the leaders in their organization. So my question to you is, why do you think organizations or businesses should invest in leadership?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Let me first acknowledge, sadly, that most don't. That there are a lot of people in the workforce that are underfed when it comes to leadership development. And if you're in that organization, and I say to your listeners, I would encourage you to take hold of your own development. And there are some free resources. You can certainly subscribe to TED Talks on YouTube, right? But you also have to ask yourself, am I worth investing in? And if that means you can only buy a book every 6 months, then buy a book every 6 months. If you can make a larger investment in yourself, I would encourage you to do so, even if it's just reaching out to leaders you admire and taking them to lunch or breakfast. Having said that, the companies that I'm fortunate to work with, as Jim knows, I work with some companies that I help co-design a 2-year leadership program, and the senior leaders go to every session in the company Jim is talking about. Those 2 leaders, by the way, both of them billionaires, they got other stuff to do, right? They were leading a $6 billion company, but what do? 12 times in 24 months, they go and they work with a full day, 12 times in the course of 2 years. They spend with their next generation of leaders, partially being the co-facilitator of the program. They're that invested in their next generation of leadership. It's an insurance policy because it develops the bench strength, because they know eventually they're not going to be there, and the current level of senior executives will eventually retire and such. So as an insurance policy to the sustainability of their company, they need to be constantly deepening the bench strength and developing the next generation of leadership and passing on the baton of their heritage. People need to understand the story of their company and the values that get passed on through their storytelling. So I love seeing when leaders are engaged, and those 2 are really a model. Fortunately, I've got 3 other companies that, I could tell you that one of those other companies, they do the same thing. That the CEO of the company is there every single time. And I love that when I see that kind of leadership engagement.
Wow, and that's really powerful. This conversation has overall been really powerful. I've learned a lot, Bill. Thank you so much for joining us, Coach and Rehnuma. Do you have any final thoughts here as we're running up against it, and we don't want to take too much of your time, Bill? But Rehnuma,
yeah, we can go on and on. But my last question to Bill. Why should we be excited to lead? Because I've seen so many people who know that they have the strength, they have the power, but still when they are asked to lead, they refuse. So to them, what would be your advice? Like, why should we be excited to lead?
Difference making. When you are, again, acknowledging straight up, leadership can be really hard. There are ethical dilemmas. There are really tough choices. Sometimes you'll have to fire a person. It can be, you carry a burden of responsibility. When you're leading a $6 billion company, you got to you feed the beast, you got to build the beast, right? You build the beast, you got to feed the beast. You got to keep money coming in, keep the workforce working. So it can sometimes be a burden. I think what makes the burden worth it is difference making and legacy creation. That you can, a leader might say one thing to a person that will change the trajectory of that person's whole career. They might give them a piece of feedback that initially stings, that turns that person into a better professional, makes that person a better human being. In the beginning of many leadership programs that I construct, we'll ask the incoming leaders, what is it that you want to get out of your leadership influence when it's all said and done? I'll ask that to beginning leaders, but I'll also ask it to leaders that are really seasoned. What are you most proud of getting done in your career now that it's coming to a close? And it's the same answer, that I want to leave a positive legacy, that people can be able to point to the influence that I had working with them and say, I'm a better professional, I'm a better human being because of the involvement that person had in my career. And I can think of 5 people off the back, including one I've mentioned to you before, that have impacted me, that made me a better person, not just a better professional. And then it becomes my responsibility to carry that forward into the world. And I think when you're in a leadership role, it's a honor, it's a privilege, and it's holy. There's a spiritualism to it. It's precious, and not everybody will be afforded the opportunity to enjoy that influence that comes with leadership. And if you are given this ability to move into a leadership role where you get to impact other people's lives, you have to honor that and do your level best to be a good person in this world. Being a good leader should never require being a bad person.
Right.
You should be a good human being, leaving people better off than you found them.
Amen to that.
Hey, Bill, in closing up, first of all, I just want to thank you. We really appreciate, I knew you'd be great, but you've exceeded our expectations. You've been outstanding. We really appreciate your wisdom and sharing today. Just to help promote you, how would be best for people to connect with you? And also, when is the new book coming out?
Great. Well, the new book coming out should be coming out in the fall timeframe. And people will be able to go to giantleapconsulting.com/2words. And that's the numeral 2 and then words. And then they can also find me. Just go to couragebuilding.com. That's the best way to find me. It's at the website. But hey, since you asked, they could also just go btreasurer@giantleapconsulting.com and send me an email. That'd be great.
Great.
And Jim, so great to be with you. And thank you for introducing me to John and Rehnuma, because it's always great for me to stay tapped into the new generation coming up. They're doing a great job.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you,
Thank you
Bill.
all.
And again, those contact information that Bill just shared, they're down in the show notes. So go check them out right now. Again, you can visit giantleapconsulting.com/2words. More info about that new book that Bill's coming out with this coming fall that we're looking forward to. And we'll have all that info down there. So head on down there and get in touch with Bill if you liked what you've heard today. What was your main takeaway from today's conversation with Bill Treasurer? Let us know. Of course, Limitless Leadership Podcast at gmail.com if you want to email our generic Gmail account, or you can get in touch with us on Facebook, Coach Jim Johnson, Dr. Rehnuma Kareem, or me, Jonathan Gehring, because I use my full name. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one on the Limitless Leadership Lounge.
Thanks, everybody.